Good morning again. Welcome to Friday Focus. Thank you for joining us this morning. Welcome back. We're trundling through the year, so we're coming towards the summer months. The year is going very quickly. We're past our 50th episode now, so we're into the next phase of Friday Focus, and again bringing in guests from all over the world, talking about education matters, talking about what's going on in curriculum redesign, particularly because that's a passion of mine in terms of focusing. But I'd love to invite back our guest this morning, Dr. Tazos. We spoke some time ago now, but just welcome back, Dr. Tazos. Thank you for being here this morning.
Thank you very much. It's very kind of you, and congratulations on your, is it 50 episodes?
I think this is episode 52. So
this is wonderful.
We've been going for 2 years now, so it's
lovely to see the impact you're having on education globally.
Yeah, well, that's humbling, really is humbling. But I really appreciate the kind of conversations. Now, for those that didn't hear the episode before, Tazos, tell us a bit about your journey. So, how have you got to where you are? So, at the moment, you're in Cyprus.
Yes. I actually started in the UK. I started in the UK, and I did a PhD actually in biochemistry. But my journey started off in the UK, teaching Ashby, Rutland, Leicestershire, many schools in the UK before we decided to leave the UK. 90s. I think there was a big recession at that time, if we all recall.
Yes.
Margaret Thatcher days, and that sent us to Cyprus, and that was the beginning of our international journey. And I very quickly moved to school leadership, from teaching biology, head of department biology sciences, and I moved to school leadership in Cyprus. Then continued my leadership journey to Bahrain, Zambia, Africa, China, Saudi Arabia. Then COVID hit a few years ago. I was ready to put everything down and say, enough's enough, but COVID hit. Didn't want to give up. Passionate about education. My passion is about inspiring young minds to achieve the best that they can, and I believe in that passionately, or inspiring leaders, developing leaders of learning globally. So during the COVID time, we were invited. I was in India at that time, in Mumbai, and we just finished a 2-year contract. Obviously, I wasn't going to renew it because we were stranded by the Gate of India. Actually, it was a beautiful place to be stranded. We had the view of the Gate of India, and we were flown out. I was head of school there. We were introducing, looking at literacy. In fact, that's where we sampled GL assessment, NGRT, how language can affect attainment, and we use GL assessment, NGRT, and CAT4 there. Made astounding progress, but we had to leave Mumbai, so we were airdropped eventually to Athens, and not a nice place to be airdropped to. We couldn't sit still. Myself and my wife, who's also an educationist, but now a writer on her 3rd book. So we managed to get across to Kosovo, taxi by taxi and test by test. Yes. And they wanted to implement. They were doing the Cambridge system. It was the Finnish School of Kosovo, International School and they just implemented. They wanted to implement the Finnish system in a Cambridge curriculum, and Kosovo was quite traditional. So my job was to develop a system of inquiry-based learning, empowering students, learner agency, Finnish-style education presentation into a Kosovan system, which was fantastic. We had an amazing year there. Before I was then drawn to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia was beginning to change. Education was opening up, and I was there for quality assurance. The men and women were starting to talk, and we had to train the teachers, again, to look at learning instead of teaching. Then I had a session in China. This was past my retirement age, really, which is still ongoing. And that was an IB school. We were looking at implementing the IB, and particularly challenging because the Chinese were not real IB learners. So trying to get them, global citizenship, learner profile, etc. Interesting but challenging, yeah. And this was Chinese students. More recently, I had an assignment in Bahrain, quite a low school, let's say budget school, mainly with Filipino staff, and we were introducing again the MYP and DP and trying to look at a learner profile. So look, I've been in education now over 40 years, and I haven't lost my passion towards what I believe.
And Tazza, I think both of us are the same. I mean, I've been an educator for over 40 years too. My experience has been in the English system, and I find the fascination of this conversation is that we share very common values, even though I come from a system that is silo based in terms of its subject delivery. And I know, if I was talking to somebody yesterday about, the acronyms we use. So International Baccalaureate, IB, the middle years program, that's, what your MYP, the acronyms that we use just simply describe a form of curriculum pedagogy, a setup that we are going, or an assessment methodology. But the guts of what we're talking about, and I want to touch a few things that so inquiry learning particularly is the basis of IB rather than chalk and talk, structured learning. So where does inquiry come in? And they're not mutually exclusive, they can be complementary. So we because that's what you're saying, isn't it? They're performing.
Look, I'll explain on the assignment I had in Dubai on this as quality assurance across 4 schools. And the inspection team in Dubai, KHJ, DSIB, puts innovation first and puts progress first, and very much focuses on learner agency. The student actually being empowered, let's say, to uncap their learning. So they become the agent of learning. So what we did is we focused on learning, not rather than teaching, as well as teaching, but the learning was the focus. Now, the myth was we were forgetting about content. Absolutely opposite. Yeah. What we did, we actually looked at all curricula, with Cambridge, American. We looked at several other countries because this was 29 nationalities. So what we found that when we were looking at sciences, mathematics, the core subjects, is the curriculum standards and the fits, and we didn't have AI then, so we did it all manually. Now it's quite easy because you can, I did a comparison between the Cambridge, British, Greek, Israeli, and Russian, and the fit was uncanny. So our aim was to get 75% of students attaining above expected in content, let's say, which is what the silo is about. But we weren't going to teach the content-driven way. And we wanted people to believe us. So we used the same benchmarks. We used GL assessment, which is very, very good, and that eventually was recognized in Dubai because we were able to measure progress in maths, English, and science compared to UK and international schools. We were able to use CAP4, which was a cognitive ability test. So we looked at the potential of students, and we had the belief that every child can achieve the best that they can in terms of progress. So the content expectations were high in every lesson. But what we did is we empowered students. If you had an objective, we empowered them to achieve the objective according to their learning style. And we used strategies such as self-assessment, peer assessment, to empower them even further, teacher assessment as well. Where we needed to convince the parents, we used tests, and what we did, and what I was used to doing, and what I empowered a lot of the teachers to do, which is why we got to outstanding in 3 years, is we used IGCSE questions as starters in year 7. Now you would think, what? Can you do that? Well, absolutely, because the students didn't know any different. So they were answering IGCSE questions in year 7. We were looking at DP1 a year before, And the students were just rising to it because we'd empowered them. It wasn't. Now, how did we manage this? We looked at teaching and learning. So we went from the PowerPoint, content delivery, we went to inspired learning. So the objectives were clear, ambitious, but what we did is the teacher wasn't speaking for more than 6 minutes at a go. They were still drilling the content, but more think, pair, share, more discuss, more inquire, why, what.
Yep.
And we had 25% good teaching when I got there, but within 3 years we went to 75% good and better, up to outstanding, and we validated this with a progress. As a result of this change, it was like parallel. The progress of student achievement, of students achieving, mirrored the quality of learning in the classroom and quality of teaching.
Yeah. And I think certainly one of the guests that we've talked to, Marcelo Starikov, talks about his work, The Joy of Not Knowing, and the pedagogy of inquiry. You've just referred to sort of setting objectives. He articulates it as setting an inquiry, so that asking those deep questions, like you're saying, so you could set a challenging question. Now I've worked with him and heard him say, we're putting some deep philosophical questions with some fairly young children who then respond to them, really, really quickly. Do two-dimensional shapes, or what do one-dimensional shapes exist? Asking some very young children that, and they get into exploring. What do you mean? How does that shape? What is it? So has it got thickness? And what does that mean? And really getting children to inquire and teaching them to inquire and ask questions is really powerful. So I recognize what you're saying. That's really so. What you were saying about Kosovo in terms of the Finnish and the traditional. What did that look like in terms of when you got there? And so you talked about Dubai and Bahrain.
Yeah, look, I think number one is the governance wanted it. That made it completely easy.
Yeah.
And we had the Cambridge curriculum, which they were convinced. So we weren't going to reduce standards. So the parents very much into the concept of Cambridge, as they are in many international schools and IGCSE. But we flipped it, like I did in Dubai. So we went for the traditional method because Cambridge had already developed these of I can statements, which people recognized. Particularly the older students, it was very, very successful because the students are quite passionate, which really helped us.
Yeah.
So we converted lessons into, the I can became the objective, aspirational objective. So if it was dark photosynthesis, a reaction of photosynthesis, that became an objective. But most important thing, they wanted everything tracked, right? And we were able to do that very simply through a tracking sheet that students began to take ownership of, because they wanted the evidence and the parents wanted the evidence, right? And everyone wanted the evidence. Yeah. And it was just very simple. Here's the I can statement, linked to Cambridge with the code, so we're doing this. Here's the self-assessment from the student, right? And technology wasn't that good there, but we still use photos and sharing with parents. Presentations of students, right? Groups of students are again presenting the knowledge or content. And we made sure that the exam questions, and to be honest, the IGCSE questions, which if you look at them in entirety, are not that challenging. It's just training.
Yeah.
Right? A lot of the best basic questions, the low-level questions, we just used them throughout the whole process, in starters, in plenaries. So the language became easy. And then the data questions, the application questions, we would make them into inquiry. So we would take, let's say, a GCSE high tier inquiry application question, and that would become an inquiry. And the students would feed back an inquiry, and they didn't know it was an IGCSE question. So what we were doing, we were using the custom and passion of the students, because very passionate students, really, really wanted to learn, right? So we didn't have behavior problems. And the teachers, aspirational, right? Local teachers, they're just craving to know. It's not about, I know, this is the way to do it. It's about so that teamwork approach and almost naive, let's all do it together, enabled an environment to move us towards what the Finnish style of teaching and learning, which is, I mean, many people describe that as the best education system. Why? Well, this is what we were looking at. And one of the students, I mean, amazing, she was quite a low ability student, but she was doing IB, MYP, and then DP. But the progress she made was phenomenal because it just identified her nature. And she liked the logical way of measuring her own progress and talking to her parents, and we had discussions with the parents, and she loved that. And I mean, I follow her on LinkedIn, and now she's running a really good business now. And I feel, well, look, that wouldn't have happened if she was just failing exams, because they would have failed their exams. You know, they were more skills based and still achieving the content. I mean, they weren't celebrating IGCSE grades or anything like that. They were celebrating what the output of the students was, you know, and the presentations of the students. So very powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, Tazos, I need to take a break for a moment because we've got to do the social media element. But I wanted, just thinking about that young lady, we in our conversation the other day talked about special education needs. I'd like to start the next section by just your perspectives on that, if we may.
Okay.
Yeah. So just where we are, then please, if you're watching, you're on LinkedIn, you're on YouTube, you're on Substack, or you're on Spotify, we really appreciate it if you can like, share, and subscribe to the channels, the Smart Curriculum Network. It helps us to build the impact this is having. As Tazos said at the beginning of this, the show now goes out across the world, and there are 1,000, 1,500 people every episode that are getting involved in the conversation. If you're there, you're here, this is a recorded session rather than a live one, please leave a message, ask a question, share something. We'd really appreciate your input. So please press the buttons, as you can see on the screen, like, share, and subscribe, but do get involved in the conversation as well. We appreciate your input, and we'd like to hear your views and perspectives on the things that we are talking about. So please get involved, like, share, and subscribe. LinkedIn, YouTube, Substack, and Spotify. Thanks, and we'll continue the conversation. So Tazos, I know when we were talking the other day, I referred to, I mean, obviously in England and certainly across the UK, there is this concentration on special education needs and inclusivity. And you know, I've commented previously that in some ways, this whole construct is a product of the system because of the kind of drive to the middle, in a sense of, you know, that perspective. You made some interesting perspectives, or you brought an interesting perspective based on sort of away from England. Just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, very much. It's something I've been passionate about ever since I started teaching. And the concept of the humanistic concept of inspiring young minds, right? They come to us as young minds wanting to learn, inspiring young minds to achieve the best that they can. And this is the key thing, with the gifts that they have. So inclusivity is about us as educators and educational leaders believing that every human being has a gift. And we're not making a judgment on that gift. So the reason I react against the label of special educational needs is that, for example, ADHD. And throughout my career, and I remember once in a student in Limassol that was identified as ADHD, and I was principal there, and the system was, again, identifying special educational needs, going to refer to a psychologist, giving them some kind of drug, etc. So this child kept being sent to my office, and I picked up the passion, and he eventually loved coming to my office because I picked up his passion. He was just a very highly alert child that thought fast and just got very bored with the activities. And because he became bored with activities and worksheets and the teacher talking, he was identified as ADHD. He couldn't listen for a long time. Now, many of us are like that. And when we eventually found that actually this child is very talented and we gave him some other tasks, magic started to happen. He started to get involved in drama, in sports. You know, he wasn't the child that would sit behind the desk and do his mathematics. Now, it doesn't mean he couldn't do mathematics, because a few years later, and it's really nice to be in contact with students, I'd heard that he'd passed the pilot exams and he'd become a pilot. And he remembered that time that he used to come into my office. He was always sent as a misbehaved child, a learning support child, that was identified as a troublemaker. Now, other areas, and I've been in education now for so many years, working with students of language, different languages. A UK has students of many languages. And I was also one of these people that was stigmatized for language, because I was brought up in a bilingual family speaking Greek, and Greek originally was my first language. And of course, I was the one that couldn't do well in English or speak Greek, and I was failing my exams because I didn't understand the questions, etc. I wasn't given the opportunity to achieve because of the language. So the other thing that really gets me is a language, a second language or a third language or a fourth language is a skill. It's not a learning support or special educational needs. And there comes the blur between language and special educational needs. Now, the reason I feel so passionate about this is we talk about inclusivity. Yeah. And if we focus on learning, and I'm not talking about differentiation here, I'm talking about a personalized classroom where every child achieves the best that they can with the skills that they have from their start points. Every child, unless there's a medical issue, is going to make progress. That's without any doubt whatsoever. So the idea of stigmatizing a child ADHD or dyslexia or whatever they become labeled with, and a special plan, and they have to sit in the front and they have to sit next to a teacher and work with the teacher. I mean, imagine if it was you, right? And you were in a conference and you were the special educational needs guy, and then you had to sit in the front with another consultant or teacher, and they had to explain the conference to you. What would that do with your self-esteem? Yeah. So, number one is you destroy the child's self-belief instantly. Right? They become what you say they become. They believe dyslexia. I believe I'm dyslexia. You know, I went to a recent conference with Theos Baptidis. He was dyslexic. He went through. He was another Greek Cypriot in England, and he went through the whole system of being dyslexic, and he's now in charge of Dyslexia Society, and he's one of the multimillionaires at La Senza, etc. But it's worthwhile listening to people like this who are stigmatized in their, you know, in the classroom, but are probably the highest achievers because they think differently. So yeah, sorry, I'm very passionate about this.
No, I'm listening to you, Tassos, because I know. I mean, I've talked a lot about inclusivity, and in fact now our practice becomes exclusive, not inclusive, so it's actually logically nonsense. But and I was in a trust development day yesterday where two people sitting on my table, so I was leading a conversation about turning purpose and vision into practice, and there's two people there that are saying that I've got kids at school and I'm a send mum, and I asked them, what's a SEND mum? It's a mum with a SEND child. Oh, why do we need that label? You have a child who might be neurodiverse. They're not typical. They could be outside, but exactly as you said. So what are their talents? Where's the opportunity for them? Now, we've got into this kind of mindset around, you've said before, labeling children in a particular way, but that doesn't help them. And I know my experience of educating, I was strange, as you said it, the boy that you taught, who's now a pilot, one of mine that I taught some years ago started, he wasn't attending school. He was really disengaged with education. We got him on a radio program. So he was writing scripts for a local radio program. I met him in the shopping centre a little while later, and he said, Sir, I need to tell you, I've just passed my pilot exam, and I'm going to be flying commercial flights out of an English airport. I've gone through the whole program, and it was you that changed my life. And you think,
there you go. And we do.
Exactly, you do. That's the opportunity.
See, the reason I think these children are special, and I won't put a SEND, is because if we're good educators, then we've got one responsibility: is to identify their passion and their motivation.
Yeah.
Now, if we ignore that because they're special, and we give them the same curriculum, after all, the curriculum isn't a construct of human nature.
Yes.
It's produced by bureaucrats that identify what they think is important. And much of the curriculum now is outdated, right? Whereas now, more useful, and I know we're going to come on to this, is the era of how we use knowledge, how we use curriculum, and more entrepreneur skills. Because now, many of our youngsters are becoming entrepreneurs and wealthier than many of the teachers, right? And yet the teachers are fighting against this entrepreneurship when you've got students developing apps and all sorts of things, and becoming, all right, social media, whatever, but becoming very successful in these areas. We're fighting against them, and we're saying, no. This isn't what we want. We want you to get exam results a 7 to a 9 in IGCSE or A level or IB. When you turn it around and you look at every child, the focus of our teachers should be inspiring young minds. Every child, and I believe that, can be inspired.
Yeah.
Every child can be inspired to make some kind of progress. Maybe not in the route that you want them to, right? That's where we're narrow vision. We want them to pass the maths exam. Actually, they might pass the maths exam in a different way. Or solve a mathematical problem in a different way. It's something that I'm very passionate about.
I'm with you on that, and that's partly why these conversations are so valuable. And I think educators need to hear it to kind of rebalance. And I think just to sum this section on SEND, as we call it, I think special education needs is such a reductive title, because actually every child is a special child who has education need. So it's non-typical education needs if we're going to deal with typicality, which is the kind of the bell curve kind of view of who's normal and who's outside of that normality, or typicality, because normal that's not the word to use. But that the reality is there are learners that have particular needs, they're non-typical needs, and we need to be meeting those needs by inspiring them, just as you've said.
And cultural inspiration is different. When we were in China, more different kind of inspiration. And I remember being the one with special needs, because number one, I couldn't speak Chinese and they wanted to speak Chinese. So in terms of my progress in lessons, and particularly Chinese teachers, because I really had to work on the cultural understanding and how they worked, I would have been identified as a real SEND student, right? Because first of all, I didn't have mastery of their language. I didn't have mastery of the way they learnt, right, and what motivated them to learn. And in many of those cases, they wanted more drilled type learning, and they really drove onto a different style of learning. So I would have, in that case, been identified as a serious SEND student.
Mm. But that's so. I mean, what you're there saying is that leadership in that in that environment is context specific. You've really got to know what's going on, and you've illustrated that in the various countries that you've been into. There's a time to kind of get into what the parameters and the desires and the intentions of each of those cultures. But learning is still the same. Everyone has a passion for learning, don't they?
And we're all parents and grandparents.
Yeah.
And every parent, there's not one parent in the world that doesn't want the best for their child.
Absolutely.
Right? So there's not one parent in the world that won't be inspired by a child coming home and being excited about what they've done. Right? And we've got into this mindset of measuring them against benchmarks like IGCSE or examinations. Whereas the child that comes home and has designed something, or is passionate about what they're doing, or has designed a business, or whatever, that, there's not one parent in the world that wouldn't celebrate that.
No.
Right?
No.
So we have got the avenues to do this. We just need to take away the straitjacket, because every child, every learning support child, whether they're dyslexic or ADHD, which in many cases, how it's been identified, and you listen to many, many doctors that say our diagnoses have changed now, and what we're diagnosing is completely different now, and there's also pressure from drug companies to give drugs, etc. All of this is a mess. Why are we putting children on drugs when all we need to do is inspire them? Or why are we giving them boring IEPs that you wouldn't enjoy doing? The rest of the kids are having fun, enjoying, discussing. They've got a boring IEP set to someone next to them. How inhumane is that for the child?
Yeah.
We want them to be enjoying their education. We want them to be passionate about learning.
And inspired for life. I mean, that's what you're saying. This is
inspired for life.
Yeah, we're setting them up. We can talk about lifelong learning. And actually, other conversations I've had this week, I was talking to some university financiers and saying that they're actually having to close courses because they can't get learners in. That learners are not buying in because the loans are too big. So if they take on a 45,000, 50,000 pounds, now obviously in different currencies in different areas, that's I know in America there's a suggestion that the student loan system is breaking because they're never going to be paid back. They're too big to go through. So the idea of lifelong inspiration, lifelong learning is becoming a reality where modularization and creditization of higher level programs are changing. You and I have done those sort of courses that have over our lives. So education is changing, and that's the bit that we've got to equip them for. So just moving into a kind of another, you referred to it a little bit there about the idea of entrepreneurship and teaching entrepreneurship, and there's a big sort of theme for me. Tell us a little bit about that experience of what you're doing across the countries, and that's why you're looking at curriculum.
Well, I mean, unfortunately enough, we set up since November, really, when I decided to be for the first time my own boss. So I've developed. It's not really a profit-making company. It's a group of consultants, global consultants that I've worked across the world with. We've called it Education Speaks. So we've now got consultants. Many of them are like me. One of them has just retired in Northern Cyprus. Some of them work in the UAE. Some are working in Greece. We're looking at Greece as well, and we're looking at the Balkans. And some of the work that we're doing is we're dispelling this concept of IB is the only solution. And the reason for that is because many schools can't afford IB. In Cyprus, in Greece, in the Balkans, they can't afford IB. Let me go back to the IB. IB is the approaches to learning. It's a philosophy, right? It's not a curriculum until you get to the diploma. And I think there's a bit of misunderstanding there. The IBs, the way you learn, the approaches to learning, and you can do IGCSE or any curriculum within the MYP. Right? That's not an issue. This is what we did in Kosovo. This is what we did in Dubai and many other schools. We delivered the IGCSE system, approaches to learning. Now, entrepreneurship is based on core approaches to learning skills, such as inquiry, critical thinking, being able to communicate, being able to synthesize, being able to, even if you use AI, and I'm sure you're going to ask me about that, fine, you synthesize it and you speak about it in 3 minutes. And then somebody else asks you to make an argument for that as a human being. So you're beginning to develop this mastery of entrepreneurship, how to gather content very quickly, because we all do that. I mean, if there's anyone listening here that doesn't use AI to gather content instantly, or their mobile phones or whatever to gather content instantly, I think that they'd be lying, right? Because everyone uses it. But the thing is to be able to gather this content, synthesize it, and then use it in an entrepreneurship manner. So what we're doing across some schools, one of the schools I'm working at is we're taking all curriculum models, and we've synthesized the standards, American, British, Canadian, in this case, Russian, Ukrainian, and Israeli, because we've got a lot of it. And what we're finding is that the science, maths, and English, actually the standards, are identical, right? Almost identical, within tweak, especially if you say aspirational standards. So the content, let's say, is identical within, right? And we're making it challenging anyway. So we've got all our international standards. So we're now focusing on approaches to learning, and particularly, I mean, you call them entrepreneurship skills. Entrepreneurship skills are about student agency, learning agency, discussion, collaboration, all these IB learner profile skills or approaches to learning that the IB does, right, that's been identified as IB, but can be done in any other school because they're skills. Right? So what we're doing now is we're helping schools develop, identify the framework, saying standards are there. So parents, you're happy. We'll give you the GCSE results. But what we're focused on in classroom is inspiring our minds, but giving them the skills to become true entrepreneurs and be able to speak about their learning, the impact of the learning, why it's meaningful. Also, SASED, why it's meaningful to the environment, right? So we're also working with a company called SASED, who's been going for 7-8 years, and saying, well, if we're inspiring all these students, actually, they could have a lot of action. They could make a lot of action towards the environment. And there are many schools now, there's one in Crete and others, that we're now collaborating with to actually make a difference.
Yeah. Taz, it's really interesting to hear you describe that kind of progression of things, because in the work that I've been doing with schools on entrepreneurship, and certainly the work I did in creating an entrepreneurship academy some years ago, we brought kind of entrepreneurship into 6 domains, and one of them, because I've been involved in charity for most of my life, and people talk about social enterprise and charitable activity. It kind of trips off the tongue, but we forget that actually a lot of volunteering is about young people and adults who see an opportunity or see a gap and get in and do something. And it might be selling secondhand clothes, but it also might be volunteering or getting on the street or being there with people. So social enterprise is actually well embedded in our understanding. And I asked the question once, so why don't we teach children to volunteer? Why don't we? And some of them, if you start talking to children, the number of them that are carers to their parents or grandparents, why do they do that? Because they have a kind of an inbuilt familial kind of link with that person. They've got an ownership in their own emotions of that. So why don't we do that? So an environmental enterprise, there's lots of sort of elements of environment enterprise. We see that, Greenpeace through to, what's going on, to generate water in Africa or put trees back in desert areas. There's lots of it. So enterprise is not just create a business and make money. It's about all of the aspects of human ambition and human activity. And it's great to hear you describe that. So we talk about 6 domains of enterprise, which is social enterprise, environmental enterprise, personal enterprise, me setting goals, me doing my personal best, financial, commercial, and creative enterprise.
Okay,
so why am I part of a band? Why would I play in a band? Because I love it. I enjoy.
So all these goals, and I think this is why many schools talk about the IB. And the IB is, again, a framework. Right? And again, there's nothing to stop any school from doing the same thing. They talk about enterprise all the way from PYP. They do their personal projects. They do their inquiry projects. And by the end of year 10, they've produced a personal project. By the end of year 6, they've done a PYP project, which is personal, could be environmental, could be volunteering. So this is embedded. And there's also community action service that's embedded into the
Exactly.
IB. Right? Now, these are all things. There's nothing here that's magic. No. These are all things that any school can do. There's nothing to stop you through inquiry-based learning of introducing personal projects, of introducing community action service. In fact, the Duke of Edinburgh Award, embraces all of this. Yes. And I know when I was in Cyprus many, many years ago, we introduced the Leadership Award, which was like a dilution of the Duke of Edinburgh Award, for all our students. Right? So they had to do all the different areas that are just not academic. The physical, the skills, the what they love, the expeditions, all of the aspects of the award, the community service, were embedded into education. And when I speak to my daughters, because they did it, what do they remember about their school most? They remember about the expeditions, the projects, the service they gave, the way they went to the Zambian village and realized that actually Zambian children were fantastic, and even though they were poor, they were highly motivated. This is true learning. Now, there's nothing to stop schools from doing this.
Absolutely. No, do you know, I did a training session in a local authority here. So they were in the room with senior educationalists and inspectors and those kind of people. And I asked them exactly that question that you just said. What was the most memorable thing of your school life? So 40 people in the room, high up, talking about, their education experience and whatever. Not one single person in the room talked about the classroom. They all talked about those things that you've just mentioned, so the trips and the expeditions and the thing. I said, look, 40,000 hours in a classroom for over your school life. Yeah. And none of you can talk about it as the most important thing. And that's the only thing that you're concentrating on, because you see these other things as peripheral, and but they're actually the thing that gets the child into the school, or not in many cases, and gets them inspired to want to learn. So really important. Tassos, I need to pause for 1 second, and then we'll come back to the next part of the conversation, if I may. So just at this point, the work of Smart Curriculum Network, you're engaged in this conversation. So thank you for being here. I do just need to say to you, if you've been around us, you'll know that I've been putting together the books that are now going out. So the Efficient School is the analytic work that we're doing with schools, but speaking to, some of the things that we're talking about cost money. So how do you find the money to make them happen? So get involved with us in this. There's a QR code there on the screen. At the moment, it's an ebook. If you stick around until August this year, we will be getting it published. So it will be coming out in August 2026. So please use the electronic book to now, and once it's out, we will be announcing it. That in March, I also published the Perfect Timetable, which is not a timetablers book. It's for school leaders, and it addresses some of these issues that we're talking about. How do you put a school together? What questions are you asking? And how could you make all of this happen? How could it be real for you? So if you want to get involved in that conversation, please do use the QR code. This one's published as a book. It's out on Amazon now. Please get involved in the conversation. If you see some stuff there that's valuable, please do let me know. Contact me through the Smart Curriculum Network. Tezos, let's come back to this conversation.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something because when I was in Dubai, I had the privilege of working at some stage with Roy Blatsford. He's the one that wrote the standards, and it was inspirational because he I think had the same kind of mindset, and he used to believe in open doors and the sparkling classroom, and the sparkling moments in the classroom, and the celebration of student successes, and feedback, genuine feedback to the students on the walls. So he would wander around the school, and within minutes, and we did it together, we would be able to see if we've got inspired students and memorable moments. And the concept of creating memorable moments for students are plentiful that they will remember in 20 years' time. Right? So, and it's not that difficult, because if you focus on a student and their passion, and you give them meaningful feedback, and you make them feel special, right? And whatever they do, whether it's a dictation or a maths problem or whatever, they're more likely to be quoting you 20 years on. So that was a really wonderful experience working with someone with that mindset. And the outstanding lesson, because the outstanding lesson was always a mystery. What's an outstanding lesson? Well, an outstanding lesson is we don't even know where the teacher is. It's not about the top academic standards and everyone sitting in rows and everyone getting A stars. It's about every child engaged and motivated in learning, and these special moments, these special sparks of moments. So that was something that I learned earlier on in my career through a true professional. And
absolutely, and quite often those outstanding lessons we don't hear about until they're adults, and they come back and say, I wish, or thank you, or look at what I'm doing now because of what you said or you did. In that, it's not that they're the things that make the difference, and every child deserves that. Every child deserves that element of. We're running short of time, so I do want to get into your conversation around the use of AI, and you've referred to it in terms of inquiry and using it. Just touch on a little bit of your passion around AI and how it's being used in your work.
There's a lot of talk about AI at the moment, negative and positive. Just like there was a lot of talk when the first calculator came out many years ago, and I remember going through the same kind of debate. And at that time, they were talking about mathematics and, the thinking behind mathematics, and it's taken away the thinking, and, how a student's going to solve problems by using a calculator and the cognitive ability. In many cases, we've come around to the same thing with AI. So the AI is not solving problems. It's like a tool like the calculator. It depends on the prompts that you give it. So it requires a lot of cognitive intelligence to give it the right prompts. Yeah. And because of the way it's structured, if you make one tiny error in your prompt, it misleads you, and you start believing the misleading. And that's happening in many areas. And you will notice, people are responding in emails, and it's all AI driven now, and you're beginning to lose the personality. So now there's a bit of a kickback to, this is AI answering me, this is AI doing this. That doesn't impact high quality learning, because high quality learning, in a high quality learning environment, this is just another tool. A high quality learning environment is interactive, it's critical thinking, it's students talking, discussing, not about, it does help limit planning time, create tables for you, blah, blah, blah. But we've got lots of programs that did that anyway. It just does it faster. You know, we've always used Excel and Word and PublicHub and all sorts of programs that speed things up. You've got all these companies selling you databases and things like that to make things easier. They're probably the ones that are going to suffer most, because AI is doing this for you quickly. I can get my student list, I can get my origins of students, I can get their sex, I can get their date of birth within seconds. Right? So I can create a database within seconds. But what I can't do with AI is get the students to think critically, to discuss, to summarize, to synthesize, to apply, and to put that passion. You can't, AI cannot put passion into anybody. So it's a tool, but we have to manage it like we manage it driving a juggernaut.
Yeah. And I my trips this week, you know, I've worked with people all over the country in England and the UK, and watched people using AI as a tool, exactly as you just described. It does a job, it does it quickly. You need to curate it, you need to be careful with it because of what it's bringing back, you need to test it. But then that's where we need the critical thinking skills, we need the kind of appreciation of both sides, a bit of empathy, a bit of real understanding to kind of explore the kind of journey. Now, look, we're running short time as ever.
Just one last thing.
Oh no, go on.
I worked with a teacher yesterday, and we were designing physics, backward by design, from IB 13. And we said to AI, we said, devise a lesson that asks IB and GCSE questions for year 7 students. Within seconds, it came up with the students. And then we said, personalize them to include these skills: think, pair, share, learner agency. Within seconds, it did that. So as a teacher, they were able to teach high concept skills using AI in a grade 7 lesson within minutes. Now, that was through manipulation of using AI in a productive way.
Yeah. And similarly, I watched a member of staff saying, we've built an AI agent that will take prepared lesson plans for kids that have missed lessons and summarize them into a series of questions or inquiry activities to say, if I've missed 3 lessons, take these 3 lessons and put the key elements in one plan and give it to the child to say, look, this is what you missed to be where you need to be. That's the, now, you know.
But the caveat there is like a juggernaut, you need a driver. Otherwise, a driverless juggernaut can do a lot of damage.
Yeah. And that's where inquiry is not content. Exactly. And that's where if it's just content, then, you know, okay, you might get concepts. You do need to be careful with it. So you've got to hold these things in balance. So Taz, I know in terms of our timing, I don't, you know, we have these conversations and it's really valuable. And I hope, folks, if you're listening, please, you know, I know this is recorded, so we haven't had live questions, but if you do have questions and you do want to get involved in the conversation, please do put it in the chat wherever you are. They'll come through to us. As always, I ask this question at the end of these shows. You know, if you could change one thing, what would it be? And I guess in this, you know, over the next 10 years, you know, we're going to see, and we've seen dramatic change since the pandemic and some of the things that are now embedded. What do you see as the biggest changes over the next 10 years in terms of the work?
I just want education to start focusing even more on motivation, inspiration, and the belief that every child can and will succeed. I think that mindset begins to be at governance level, school governance and school leaders levels, and they develop this vision that in their school, irrespective, every child will and must succeed. And it's very simple. Our aim is to motivate these young children to succeed in the best way that they can. If we can have an impact on that, then I think we'll see enormous improvement over the next 10 years. We'll see so much entrepreneurship. It's a simple switch of mindset on focusing on learner passion.
I mean, in the end, you know, we can have these conversations about process and learning and structure and so on, but in the end, it's the kids that matter. Yes. It's the children's, you know, their futures.
Absolutely. That's what we're about.
Yeah.
That's why we're in education.
Yes, and still passionate about it, and still do what we do at this stage. Is there anything you want to finish with?
Yes. If anyone wants to look me up, I'm on LinkedIn. I write articles on a regular basis. If anyone wants to respond or ask me to write an article, I would love to. We've developed a global company. It's not really a company. It's more like consultancy across the globe called Education Speaks, because we believe passionately that education speaks. And we believe that education can change the world. And this is why we named the company Education Speaks, because we need education to do more of the speaking globally. And we've got people like Chris here who's spreading the word globally, and many of other ambassadors globally. We've got links with SACED. So I would love to hear from you. I really would love to hear how you can help us, empower change in the world.
And if you want to reach out to us, please do so. Go directly to Tazos if you can. We'll put the links in the show notes, and obviously you'll see it on LinkedIn, on YouTube, and on Substack. That's where you'll find most of our activity. But please do contact us and get involved. If I put the contact details across the bottom of the screen, it should be appearing now. So info@smartcurriculum.net. Just get in touch and just get involved in the conversation. LinkedIn is probably the best place because you can direct message Tazos or myself. Please do get involved in the conversation. So Tazos, thank you so much for the conversation again this morning. Really appreciated the input, and I'm sure we'll speak again and we'll collaborate at some point. But stay where you are for a second.
It's always a delight speaking to you, Chris. Always motivational. Thank you.
Real pleasure. So thank you guys for being here. We appreciate your input into the conversation. As I've said, over the summer, we've got a variety of guests. In fact, we've just been lining up some to talk about a variety of different subjects. Certainly last episodes from Kai Vatcher and Pippa Wallner, Dr. Pippa Wallner, on well-being and managing your own setting boundaries for yourself. There's some really interesting conversations that people engaging with at a significant level. So please, thank you for being involved. I really appreciate your input. See you in the next episode, but get involved in the conversation.